Hey gang, what's going on? I'm your host, Red Hills Rancher, and this is the Ranching Reboot podcast. This episode of your favorite weekly podcast brought to you by Grassroots Carbon, who are paying ranchers just like you for good grazing practices and responsible adaptive management. There's no upfront out-of-pocket cost to the rancher and very little risk as long as you don't plan to plow up your pastures. Drought happens in the Great Plains more than 50% of the time, and Grassroots thought about that and accounted for it too, along with wildfires. Basically, as long as you don't plow up the prairie again, just enjoy the payments and use them to take your operation to the next level or go buy a new pickup. Whatever makes you happy. Don't let me tell you how to run your life. I just want to encourage you to imagine the possibilities of what you could do with a carbon storage contract with Grassroots Carbon. When you're ready to take your management to new heights, head on over to grassrootscarbon.com/reboot and start your journey today, or just click on the link in the episode description. One of the really cool things I've noticed over the years practicing regenerative ag and good grazing management is that the wildlife, fish, and game here have all increased in numbers. The first hatch of quail is up and moving, and man, there's a lot of coveys with over 20 birds. Last year, I partnered with the Land Trust to help me connect with sportsmen, fishermen, and folks just like you wanting to be outside. I hate strangers knocking on my door and asking to use my land. With Land Trust, every user is identity verified by the team, and every property is visited by one of their many territory reps. My rep, Tom, has been great to work with. He's been out twice on scouting trips, and we often talk about other recreation opportunities. As a matter of fact, just this morning, he sent me a picture of a real nice buck one of the game cameras picked up. So click the link in the description to check out the listings on the ranch, and come check out one of my 14 privately stocked ponds with channel cat, smallmouth, or bluegill. If fly fishing's more your thing, I have miles of creeks with deep spots, including 2 beaver complexes, where I caught, like 3 bluegill in a row. It was pretty cool. Anyway, fishing, hunting, birdwatching, stargazing, just plain hiking, Land Trust has something for you. Click the link in the description. And if you're on the other side of the fence as a as a landowner, I'll wager that Land Trust can help you find some more revenue streams. All you have to do is click the link in the description. Last week, my friends at Noble Research Institute had me in Stillwater for their Essentials of Regenerative Ranching course, and I really had a great time meeting new friends and reconnecting with the facilitators, Stephen and Mike. I thought it was such a great thing and such valuable knowledge, I begged enough that the fine folks at Noble are allowing me to give away a full tuition scholarship for the Ardmore School October 31st and November 1st. All you have to do to win is go to redhillsrancher.com/noble and sign up, or click the link in the description. This is a great opportunity for 2 days of education, and I really want to share it with you guys and send one lucky fan to Ardmore for the Noble Foundation's Essentials of Regenerative Ranching course. That's October 31st through November 1st in Ardmore, Oklahoma. Enter the giveaway at redhillsrancher.com/noble. And don't forget that next week is the Bottom Line Conference out in Lake, Kansas. Bottom Line is the best little regen ag conference in western Kansas, and it's one of my favorites. This year they're having Steve Campbell to talk, Keith Burns, several other great ones that you're not going to want to miss. So I'll see you guys at Bottom Line in Lakin. There's a link to the registration page and the agenda in the show description. And one more thing, if you're tired of ads or just want to support the show, head on over to Spotify and take a look at the subscription options. For just $5 a month, you'll get ad-free versions of every episode. Hey, you want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money. All in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. And when you want to take your conversations with fans to the next level, Q&A and polls are the best way to get them talking. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. Best of all, it's totally free with no catch. I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started today. There you are. How are you, brother?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I am. Today.
that sounds like the stereotypical rancher in the middle of summer.
Well, I was gone for 2 days. I just got back from Noble Research's Essentials of Ranching course this one's in Stillwater. And if I didn't screw up in the intro, I've got an announcement, and like this kind of relevant. So I'm going to give away a seat to an upcoming Essentials of Regenerative Ranching course. Run back to the intro if you want to know how to do that, because I haven't quite got the link set up as we're recording this, but hopefully by release time that'll all be done. So yeah, it was a really good course. It was 2 days. Great intro. Like they started off with, intro into 6 principles of soil health. They did a great review of the 4 ecosystem processes, a little dip into economics. Spent a lot of time outside, actually doing practical things like looking at soil, and setting up transects and teaching the students how to evaluate pasture condition and forage. So I thought it was a really cool deal. So I twisted some arms and begged and said, let me give away a seat to somebody on my podcast. And they're like, okay, we can do that. So yeah,
cool. I mean, honestly, I've been to and seen a lot of schools. Like, not many of them actually give you applicable field time. Most of them are like, hey, we're going to put you in front of a screen, sitting in a classroom for days on end. And then like, oh yeah, we might take you outside and stick you in a pasture for 30 minutes or an hour or something. And so it's pretty good that they actually give you that tangible experience.
So one more thing about that, and then I'll kind of move on, because one of the things that I really appreciated was that throughout the 2 days, if somebody had a question that kind of maybe wasn't really relevant, or the facilitators thought was going to we're going to cover later, they put it over on a whiteboard and call it parking lot questions. When he wrote parking lot questions on the board, it was right behind me. I'm thinking like, what the hell is anybody going to ask about the parking lot? I mean, parking lots are pretty simple. I mean, what kind of questions could somebody have about where we're parking our cars? It just doesn't make any sense. But then like 10 minutes later, he explained, this is a parking lot for questions. Like, I understand now. So what they did is they had like 5 or 6 up there. And at the end of the day, on day 2, there was a big block of time reserved. And we went through and we had group discussions on those parking lot questions. And I think it really enabled producers to leave with a sense that they had an actionable item.
Mm-hmm.
And God, that's huge too, right?
Yeah.
How many times you go to a conference and waste a day and you're like, I have no idea what I learned or why it's important, but it was cool.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of folks left with something that was actionable, even if it is like a baby step. I think they at least left with something actionable. Mm-hmm. So I was gone for 2 days. I left like midday Monday. I mean, you know what it's like being away for a couple days in the middle of summer.
Catch up's fun.
Nothing was wrong this morning. Everything was where they're supposed to be. My water systems were working. The fences were hot.
The ranching gods have smiled upon you.
Like, whew, dodged the bullet on this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've just been, today's just been I had to run home. I've had 2 meetings before this one and got another one after this one. So yeah, it's playing catch up is fun, but schedule's pretty clear tomorrow. So I think I'll be able to, if I don't get it all done today, it'll get done tomorrow.
There you go. It's good to have some breathing room scheduled.
Yeah, scheduled is right.
Yeah. Whatever that means.
It's pretty bad when you have to schedule your recreation time.
Yeah. I know that. That's just the life we live, though. We chose this life.
Or it chose us one way or the
other. Yeah, one way or the other.
So how's things in Georgia, my guy?
Man, I could complain, but who would want to hear it? We are experiencing above average rainfall. The creeks are still running, which to be in nearing the middle of August and still have that, and to have an overabundance of grass, man, it's finally feel like we've hit a threshold of like, man, we're actually where we should be.
Yeah, you and I talked back in the spring, and you guys kind of, forgive me for saying this, I have a hard time like when you get 60 inches of rain a year and it hasn't rained in only 2 weeks and you're complaining about drought.
Yeah.
That was a little hard to swallow from, just from perspective, but I do understand the challenges. So you started off dry and it got wet.
Yeah. So like we actually never really, we had a little bit of a dry spell late winter, but that's kind of normal for us. But honestly, like we hit spring pretty much with ample rain, and it honestly hasn't let up. We've been getting thunderstorms roll through pretty much 2-3 a week. I think we've had the longest stretch we've gone without rain this summer is 2 weeks, and that is acceptable here. Much like in you were talking with Hobbs on the podcast I know you did earlier with him. When you get down here, the humidity level stays so high that like you still get effective dew on the grass, which it will supplement rainfall for a short period of time. And so I honestly have never seen some of my pastures look the way they look now. I mean, I've got so much grass, so much so that I'm going to have to start skipping pastures because a lot of it's gotten away from me on a 50-day rest. Should have hit it at 40 days and just couldn't make it turn fast enough. So we're doing pretty good on the grass frontage. I'm looking at probably, I would say we're going to preg check. So we just pulled the bulls Monday from our 45-day breeding season. And
I was going to ask how long.
It was supposed to be 42 days, but again, I had so much grass in front of them to get them up to the corral that I had to bleed off an extra 3 days just to get them there.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean,
no, I wasn't, been out of the frame.
I'm a little more comfortable with 45 than 42 because with 45, you're guaranteed to catch 2 cycles. With 42,
yes. Exactly. You kind of you're flubbing the line there. So anyway, we just pulled them. We'll preg check. I actually just texted the vet today, try to set up a date to preg check later.
So you turn out what, the 3rd week of June?
Yes. I'd have to go back and look. I've got it written down on my phone exactly which day it was, and I can't tell you off the top of my head. But
it's like 3rd week of June, so that puts you calving 3rd week of March.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's kind of ideal for us. April is pretty much the latest I want to calve. If we'll have some calves in May, which is okay, but I want the bulk of my calving to happen in April. March, I used to think March was ideal because March is really when the grass starts coming on, but we've had 2 cool springs in a row and the grass doesn't really come on until late March. And I'm like, I would really like to have those cows. I could get them in a lot better condition in April and calve in good condition a lot easier on really good grass and still have 60 days post-birth to peak lactation of really high quality forage. I'm like, so like that window before we get into super heavy fly load season. So that's kind of like my ideal time frame. So that's what we're shooting for. But yeah, so we'll wait and see, but we should, I'm anticipating probably having, if I get 75% bred, I'll be pretty happy. Because I turned out a lot of young bulls this year. So that can go one way or the other. Either everything gets stuck because it's like a bunch of middle school boys, or they're just, it could go the other way around.
Over fighting and not doing
their job. And not knowing what they're actually doing. So we'll see how it turns out. But I anticipate that with whatever cull we do of opens, we should go in to this winter. We probably will not have had the low. We'll have the lowest stock numbers we've had since we started, more than likely. So I'm anticipating a no hay winter. I'm still gonna stock hay. I'm buying hay this summer just because you never know what winter might throw at you, and I'd rather have that reserve just in case. And so anyway, so we'll be prepared just in case, but I'm going to do my darndest with my mama cows. Now with my finishing animals, different story.
Right.
But with the mama cows, I'm going to try to overwinter with no hay. So we'll see how that goes. I might be eating those words.
It seems like we're doing one of these about every year. I had to look. The last one we did, this one should be, I think, 128. I said it, so that means something will happen between now and release day. No, this one should be 128. The last one we did was 79, and it was August. It came out August 29th, so we probably recorded it right at a year ago.
Okay. Wow. Dang. We need to circle back around a little more often than that, Ryan.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we've talked a couple times.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So
It doesn't always have to be a podcast.
No. I want to circle back to your comment about dew, and
Yeah.
I love that observation. And here in Southwest Kansas, we can either, like, this year it's abnormally humid. The last 2 years were abnormally dry.
Yeah.
The amount of dew that we have on the grass in the mornings, like this morning, I was wet from the calf down out walking through the grass, like boots totally soaked.
Yep.
And I think people really underestimate how much that dew does and how much more dew a good healthy pasture with tall grass is going to catch.
Pasture,
absolutely. In a buffalo or Bermuda grass pasture that's 2 inches tall.
Yep.
That 2 inches tall Bermuda grass pasture, that you didn't catch any dew on that.
No.
Okay. What I caught on my 4 foot tall big blue stem, my 30 inches of side oats, that's maybe it's not
significant amount,
but it's significant enough to help the plants out.
Yeah. And so, like, for me, it's not, that's a measurement that I take into account, not on the thriving side of the scale. It's on the survival side of the scale. Like, I don't anticipate dew to allow my grasses, like dew alone rather, to allow my pastures to thrive. We still need effective rainfall, but like I said, it can stretch that time. In a healthier pasture, obviously it only grows. So, like, if you go back and watch especially a lot of my older TikTok videos, I was wearing like bibs, like fishing, because I would go out early in the morning. This is before I started moving the cattle later in the day. I would go out early in the morning when it was still cool outside and be wading through, like chest high grass, and I would come back just soaked. So eventually I realized, like, this ain't gonna work. I had to wear like fishing bibs just to go through the grass so I didn't end up soaking wet. Of course, then you end up sweating yourself soaking wet. So what was the point of that? But
you're wet on both sides of a waterproof garment. Yeah.
Exactly. But I think the dew thing, like, so actually, like, the shape, and in fact, I almost want to say, maybe me and Hobbs have talked about this before. So we talk about a lot about like leaf to stem ratios. And so, like, a really stemmy plant doesn't really collect that much dew, but a very leaf laden plant actually funnels said dew towards the root system, towards its base. And like you said, I don't think that there's just insanely measurable amounts of water that's coming off of that, but it's a significant enough amount that I don't think you can just negate it altogether. Like I said, I mean, I can walk 5 feet, through a 3 foot tall grass pasture early in the morning here and be dripping wet. So, that's not a small amount of water. So anyway, but on top of that, because we're still getting that, we're getting good effective rainfall here as well. And I mean, we graze. So I'm looking out the window here now at a pasture that got away from me, that with that part I'm looking at here is 50 days ago, would have been grazed off at 1 million pounds of stock density. And I have never seen it come back the way it did. Like it just, because I actually grazed the cattle at 1 million pounds. I had some mature thistle that I was trying to knock back, and they would trample some of it, rip the leaves off some of it, bite the heads off some of it. Still ended up with a lot of standing stemmy thistle. So I come in and would mow behind them to clean that part up. And yeah, man, like it just, I guess because of the effective rainfall plus the herd effect, like, oh my God, like that stuff, within 30 days, it was already over 3 feet tall. And it got to 5 feet without a seed head on it. And I was just like, oh God. That's when I was like, I've created a jungle And I don't know, you may not have seen it. I posted a TikTok video a couple weeks ago. I haven't really posted much lately, such as we've had a newborn child, so I haven't had a lot of free time. But
Congratulations.
thank you, sir. Just trying to get some more help out here eventually.
Your own labor force, right?
Yeah, but I posted a TikTok video and I was like, just putting up fence through a sugarcane field, because that's legitimately what it looks like. I've just got Johnson grass growing. And of course, I've had multiple people message me since then and ask me about specifically grazing Johnson grass, because there is, I guess, this stigma of like, ooh, you got to be scared of Johnson grass. It's evil. Either it's invasive, it's the devil, or it'll kill your cows. And, in my context where we live, I look at Johnson grass as it's the Sudex that comes back for me every year. Like I have seen, it's the most favorable forage we have this time of year, that and the crabgrass. And both of those are, essentially weeds, but they're highly productive and they make good forage. So I've had a lot of people ask me some questions about how to graze Johnson grass effectively. And I'm like, just graze it the same way you graze Sudex. Just be wary and have a plan for, if you get a unexpected frost, have a plan to get them off of it. But we've never seen much issue from that. But yeah, I would love to have you physically be here to see what some of these pastures look like, because it's kind of hard to just, snap a picture and be like, here, and really get an idea for it.
I feel that. I'm trying to get to a place where this winter, next spring, I've got time to get out and I've got time to travel. I'm trying to get there. And trust me, there's nothing more that I'd love than to, show up at your place with a couple of microphones and a table and a tent, go set out underneath that tree behind you in that picture in the middle of your cow pasture and do a podcast amongst your cows. Like I am excited to go do that. Like that's,
oh yeah.
I'm really excited to try
just
to
have some latent going on in the background.
I might have jumped the gun. I got a little excited trying to put all that together in the summer and start thinking about it. Cause nobody really wants to go sit outside when it's 110 in the afternoon.
Yeah.
And just yap for a couple hours. Like maybe we ought to wait for cooler weather. Mm-hmm. But test runs I've done so far they've just been a lot of fun. They've turned out well. So we're going to continue developing that and try to get that content out.
Well, it'll probably be a real good seasonal thing for you. So you can film a lot of your northern climates, more in the late spring, early fall. And then you could, as you move more towards the cooler seasons in either direction, you just start to move south. You can basically be a podcasting snowbird.
There you go. I have to get Starlink so I can go podcast from the San Juan Mountains.
I like it.
But no, Johnson grass. It's not the devil. And okay, so it's declared an invasive species or a noxious weed in a lot of places. Mm-hmm. So what's the difference between an invasive species and a native species? Hold up, I said that wrong. What's the difference between an archaeologist and a grave robber?
Time.
Just time.
Mm-hmm.
Just time. I mean, since I just finished listening to a book called 1491 and the follow-up book to that 1493, and they talk about what pre-Columbian North and South America was kind of like. They talk about, the smallpox, malaria, and yellow fever plagues that wiped out 95-ish% of North and South America indigenous population. But 1493 really talks a lot about, the Columbian exchange and the exchange of previously unknown species across oceans and being introduced into novel environments. And I mean, okay, cattle are invasive species. There you go.
Yep.
Cattle are an invasive species on the North American continent. Horses are an invasive species on the North American continent. Sheep, guess what? Invasive species. Pigs, invasive species. Chicken, invasive species. So everything we eat in North America is a freaking invasive species, but we don't call them that. We just call them food. So the whole invasive versus native species argument, like let's move on from that. Okay, these plants are here; they are established. Like, we've got old world blue stems, our horrible problem down in Texas, Oklahoma, starting to creep up into Kansas. You can't get rid of them. Like, you cannot spray them. You can spray that stuff to dead dirt 3 years in a row, 3 times a year, and it'll come back. So let's figure out how to use it, folks.
Yeah.
I
mean, I like to think that on some level, I am a source. I am the source for making use of invasive species. Because we've talked about it before. Like, I mean, this property is littered with just vast swaths of forest that have been eaten by this kudzu vine, which is terribly, like, if you want to use the term invasive, probably in its truest form, because, or as I think it's typically intended to mean, it demolishes an existing ecosystem. It will overrun it. And so, where you used to have biodiversity, now you have monocrop, kudzu. And so in that sense, it is a problem. We graze the heck out of it. And again, have a lot of people, cows eat kudzu? I thought goats would. I didn't know cows would. And that's obviously mostly people who have no idea how a rumen works. But, it's each their own. But I think that ultimately, I agree with you. We tend to lean way too far into the invasives. There's really very few truly invasive species that I can think of. One, especially around here, kudzu being one, Bradford pear being another, is a blight on, the Southeast, in my opinion. However, like, all of it can be mitigated through proper ecosystem management. I won't say that it can be fully deleted, but it all can be managed. And eventually,
right there, that's the key. That's the key. These species we consider invaders or invasive, habitat converting, ecosystem, biome converting. Like, you've heard me talk about eastern red cedar trees. It's going to take over the plain. Like, it's going to happen. We can control that one pretty easy with a match.
Yep.
Like, there's a lot of things that conventional wisdom, conventional ag would want to pull out, a tool made of steel, a tractor, a towed implement, a bulldozer, an excavator, or pull out a jug.
Yep. Brought to you by Bayer. Yep.
And they don't solve problems. They just kick a can down the road and create a situation that you have to keep paying for treatment. Yeah. I'm not in the business of selling treatment, right?
Well, I mean, all you're making is
selling prevention.
Solutions.
So selling cure.
All we're talking about is the agricultural equivalent to the modern healthcare debacle, which is funny because the same people own both interests. Like you have big pharma, which owns big ag, like, and the whole system we have is predicated upon, linear thinking, non-holistic thinking. And we would rather address symptoms over and over and over and over and over and over again, rather than back up and realize, hey, we may have to change something, but a few small changes may completely eradicate all of this in a matter of a very short window of time. And it's because we've become a convenience culture. And I think ag as a whole is just as, if not more so, guilty of that than, the people that just go eat McDonald's every day because it's convenient. Because like you said, we've been indoctrinated into this, like, oh, well, I've got, a weed problem. Well, I just need to go out there and spray. I said something, I can't remember who it was I was talking to the other day, and said something to me about spraying a field, and I said, "How many years in a row have you sprayed that field?" It's kind of like the question is almost like the question didn't register. It's like,
Like
I mean, like
that,
we've sprayed it. I don't know, a lot of probably 25 years or more. And I said, and you still do it every year? You don't anticipate that killing those weeds, eventually they don't repopulate. Eventually you wouldn't have weeds. Is that right? You would think that. So you think, and so that's just the mentality that, like, I think a lot of people, whether you're in ag or whether you're not, we're all guilty as human beings of living in our own little paradigms. And we put ourselves in our own neat little boxes and just think that that's our existence and that's all there is. And we never, and like, you have to let somebody peel that box off of you. So you look around your left and your right, and all of a sudden that box isn't there anymore. And you're like, oh God, like I could have really been doing things a lot differently. And I think we're headed there. I definitely think, I know you told me I had to listen to your podcast with Hobbs before I did this one. So like, it's
I
fresh
did
in my
not.
mind.
That was not
Yes, you
intended.
did. Verbatim. You said you got to listen to that one. And I intended to listen to it anyway, so it wouldn't have mattered. But that one's ringing fresh in my mind. And honest to God, Brian, when I was listening to that podcast, I was like, Dad, come. I was like, I feel like I'm just gonna be a repetitive repetition of that entire podcast. Because I was like, I should have just been on that one with you guys. So y'all covered some good ground on that one. But yeah,
One of these days, we're all going to get together.
Yeah.
One of these days,
I don't want to lose the point, and the point I was going to make is we with the extension of the free flow of information and how much easier it is to share information with people now. I do believe that we are headed to a better place, if you will, as long as it doesn't become completely co-opted, which that's also an option as well. So
yeah, I'm not sure I can share your faith. I think that if we're going to be moving towards a better place, it's up to us to promote our local communities to build the better place, because nobody's going to build it for us.
Absolutely. I mean, I have a lot of political conversations with people because for some reason people gravitate that to me. And it interests me. I won't lie. It's like, but I always tell people, it's like, we do so much complaining and spend so many countless hours worrying about who's going to be the head of the federal government or what the federal government has done. I was like, and meanwhile, in my own backyard, my own county, they tripled our tax base this year in 1 year. And nobody got hung. Nobody's house got burned down. Nobody, there
were
was
no
none
riots.
of this.
There were no riots in front of the courthouse.
Yeah, the courthouse didn't even have a picket sign in front of it. We have gotten conditioned to lying down and taking it, and that is very dangerous. I was in a conversation with my excavator operator about this very thing, and he's like, well, what can you do except just pay it? And that, I think that, and I've also had this conversation with people, when you live the lifestyle that you and I do, we're kind of the last remnant of people that truly have a grasp on freedom.
When somebody says, who will build the roads? Like, let me fucking explain it to you. Let me explain it to you, because I maintain 12 and a half miles of roads on my property. Yeah. We'll talk about who will build the roads.
The roads. That's what I'm saying. It's like the people, I hate to use that phrase because like people, just blanket statements like that don't necessarily paint the best picture. But by and large, we have been conditioned as a civilization to be peons or cogs in the wheel and not question authority, not, go along to get along. And if you step out of that line, more than your fear of repercussion is greater than the detriment you will suffer in silence. And so I think that for those of us who still live on the land, work on the land, and are not subservient to the corporate structure, still have this notion. And I think that's why, like that, I guess you call it like the libertarian-esque, anarchist, whatever you want to call it, vein runs kind of heavily in the ranching community is, we still understand what it means to fend for our own and to take care of ourselves and not be reliant upon other people.
I'm
Anyway,
the sheriff. I'm the road maintenance department. I'm the water department. I'm the sanitation department.
You understand personal responsibility, and that's something that most people have been conditioned to be afraid of. And so I always tell people, my wife would kill me if she knew I was saying this on a recording, but I told her, I was like,
it's okay. Nobody
else. Sure. I won't get texted this snippet, right after this podcast gets released. I told her, this was after we had lived here probably 2-3 years. I said, I'm not scared to go to jail anymore. It was like I had this revelation of, not that I'm like out there doing things, that would lend me behind bars anyway, but I was like, I never realized that there was this latent subconscious fear that I'd always lived with, of like, oh my gosh, I could never be arrested because, oh my God, if I got arrested, I would lose my job, which means I would lose my house, which means I would lose my, all this stuff that was just back there, just living in the background. And you don't, and that's that operant conditioning that you don't even know you've been a part of. And when that glass wall finally, breaks, and you realize well, if I got thrown in the drunk tank, and somebody comes and gets me, well, hope the cows didn't get out overnight. All of a sudden, that fear dichotomy shifts.
You get to the point in life where jail would be a vacation.
You said it best. 3 squares a day, it's and I don't have to go chase, ranging cows. Okay, it might not be too bad. No,
I don't have to be outside in the blazing sun and freezing cold.
Yeah, it's now maybe if they reinstitute the chain gang, sure, that sounds like a day in the life, but but still, no, I say that half jokingly, but half serious, in the sense that we are, in order for the quote unquote regenerative movement to thrive, 2 things have to happen. The general populace has to support it. And currently that we are in no position to say that we are moving towards that. I think we are, but
we have an increasing rate of acceptance.
We do.
And that's a good thing. We're past the point where it can be killed by the marketplace. Mm-hmm. It is taken hold in the marketplace, and consumers have accepting it, and more consumers every day are accepting it. The one thing that I fear in that is that we are very clearly, and I've seen this in our own business and a bunch of other people that I'm friends with, we'll get into the grass-fed cooperative here in a little bit. Got other friends in other parts of the country that are doing the same thing as me. And pretty much everybody is seeing this curve where sales were here last year and they aren't meeting that expectation this year. And it's very obvious to anybody with eyes that it's because of the economy and what's going on in the world. People, and we have a very short memory too, if this had been 3 years ago, I couldn't sell enough beef. If I had the kill dates, I could kill everything and everybody'd be buying it, because guess what? You couldn't buy it at the grocery store, and everybody was scared out of their mind. And nobody was doing it.
Correct. And I think that the acceptance level is going up. However, the the accurate compensation, and me and you have talked about this before, not in a podcast, for our labor is not matching up with what Tyson can sell imported beef for. And the consumer still has no real idea that when they buy cheap beef, there's a very large percentage chance that they're not eating beef that was raised here, because that beef got shipped to somewhere else, to a different country, who will pay the premium for American beef, or it went to a premium steakhouse, or somewhere where you would naturally pay more for said beef anyway, and not have the conscious structure of, oh, well, I'm not going to pay $8 a pound for ground beef. Whereas, as we have seen, though, the commodity model, which is super reliant on inputs, and those inputs aren't getting any cheaper, number one of which being labor. But as everything creeps up, that beef price has steadily gone up. And I do think there's a break at some point where, I don't know if we get there in the next year. I don't know if we get there in the next 10, but I do think eventually what is considered now astronomically high prices for my beef will be the same price or cheaper than what you can buy it for in the store.
Yes. So I take the Stockman grass farmer, and I guess it showed up while I was gone. Do you take SGF?
They're trying to get me to pony back up for it. I've gotten it the last 3 years, and I just didn't resubscribe this year.
I think it's a worthwhile thing. Like, is every issue jam-packed with information relevant to me?
Yeah.
No. But every once in a while, there's some really great nuggets. And I wish I had it down here in front of me. I had it down here, and then I took it upstairs to read it, I don't know, before we, about an hour before we started, and didn't bring it back. But Jim Garish wrote a great article about the death of cowboy culture. And he was contrasting what it cost in 1973 to what it cost in 2023, because and he drew parallels between those 2 years, because they were both very good times for calves. I mean, great calf market. And the moral of the story was, our labor cost for day labor have gone up roughly 4 times faster than the price of calves.
Yep.
And I've had discussions with some of my friends that do day work. I think I even had a couple here on the podcast. Like, in 2009, I could hire day help for $1.25, $1.50 a day, $125 to $150 a day. Okay, and it doesn't matter if they show up and do an hour of work, rope one cow, or were there 8 hours dragging calves. Like, day rate's day rate, and that's generally how it works here. So 2018, 2019, $150, no problem. 2020 hits, 2021, 2022. Last year, I wouldn't even consider less than $250. I wouldn't even consider offering less than $250 for a day rate. Because you got to consider, before that guy even shows up, he's been working for an hour and a half to 2 hours. And when he leaves, he's got another hour and a half to 2 hours to care for that horse and his equipment when he gets home. He's got windshield time. So if he's there for an hour, you need to pay the man for a half a day. At minimum. So when it costs you $250 to hire one guy for a day, you really got to think about those costs. And if you're not hiring day help, if you're hiring like a position cowboy, that guy's got he's got to already upfront $120,000 to $150,000 worth of equipment, truck, trailer, horses, tack, and gear. Before he's even got a place to live, he's got $120,000 to $150,000 in gear that he's got to maintain every year and pay taxes on. Since the horse lover people got all the horse kill plants shut down and the price of horses is freaking skyrocketed out of control. Used to be you could buy a decent ranch horse for $3,500 or $5,000, and now good luck finding one for 10.
I was going to say.
So, costs are just spiraling upwards out of control. For labor, I mean, land, inputs, which you touched on,
Yeah.
and pickups. I mean, I know you don't need a feed truck, but if you did, it'd be $60,000.
Yeah. I
Like,
mean, I think that the big one that we'll glance on that you mentioned is land. And like I don't even consider, so I have a customer of mine who is in the process of purchasing a kids camp, summer camp, that is about 45 minutes south of here. He's been a beef customer of mine, found me on TikTok 3 years ago, been a good customer of mine, great guy. And his dream has always been to own a summer camp, like a kid's summer camp. And well, he texted me the other day and told me, hey, like we're going to go under contract for this piece of property. And he was like, how did he phrase the question? It was basically, how many acres does a cow eat in a day? Which tells you everything you should know. I was like, in my environment, I'm like, well, you work on acres per year. Like it's like, and so I told, we ended up having this conversation, and he ended up telling me, he's like, well, I don't really want to have cattle on the property like that I own. He goes, I just want to lease it. How much would a lease go for?
well, that's a different question, sir.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, well, and I told him, I was like, you can look up USDA records all that. I was like, the average pasture in this part of Georgia goes for around $26. And he was like, oh my God, I thought it would be like 10 times higher than that. And I was like, no. I go, how much do you think a cow's worth? And his response was, well, I figured the average producer makes 25 to 30% on a $5,000 cow. And I said, try selling cows for $500 at the sale barn and tell me how that works for you. I was like, but this is somebody that has no idea, like no clue about ag, other than like some TikTok videos he's watched of mine. Is not in that system, but it really was enlightening to me to realize this is the norm. This is what the general populace believes, that when they see the guy driving a 2021 F-350 King Ranch, pulling a 30-foot gooseneck trailer full of cattle, they think that load of fat cattle is worth 10 grand, 5-10 grand a pop. And because they have this Yellowstone mentality of what being a rancher, being a landowner is. And the reality is just couldn't be further from the truth. And that doesn't matter. Like whether you're on the corporate big ag side of things, own a small feedlot, whatever, or whether you're on the, hyper regenerative, if you're Hobbs Margeray, like, it's, it doesn't matter. Like the reality of the paradigm we all exist in, inside the United States, is all of our costs are going through the roof. And yeah, it might be a good year for cattle this year, as far as the commodity market's concerned. But, I think last time we did this recording, me and you talked about like the break even on a pound of ground beef. And I think when we talked last time, it was we kind of came around like $6 a pound was pretty much your like break even for cold cow ground beef, if you were going to really factor in all of your real costs. And
if you wanted to make like a few actual dollars, like
correct. Like if you wanted to say like, and when I say break even, I mean all costs are covered, including my labor, all of that. Like, so yes, I would be getting paid in that, but I'm just paying what I consider to be my laborious salary. I pay myself, like I get paid out of the business if we are profitable, but I need to also get paid enough to like know that I didn't go out there and move a bunch of fences and move a bunch of cows all year to do nothing, to not make anything. So like, that's what I view as like, okay, costs are covered $6 a pound. Well, that was last year. This year, I'm literally thinking that that's probably going to look closer to like $7.58 a pound to break even. It's like, and largely due to circling back, our tax base just tripled. And nobody in this area is full-time in ag anymore. And I say nobody colloquially, like, obviously there's a few of us, but not many. Not enough to make a real voice. And people don't realize like property taxation basically is an incentivization. Is that even a word? It's incentivizing for you to sell your land, because it's based upon what the land is valued at retail.
But okay,
and some states have different laws that like curtail that. We don't, which is funny because ag is the number one business in the state of Georgia, and we don't do a very good job of protecting our producers, I guess. But anyway, I just think that as the costs continue to climb and the earning power of the consumer, because we talk a lot, let's be honest, we talk a whole heck of a lot in regenerative ag, and you are one of the world's worst talking about like carbon credits and all this stuff that is not, it's applicable to some people, not applicable to all producers. And I think that gets held out a lot of times. It's like the carrot on the end of the stick. But like nobody, kind of like when Hobbs talked to you about like, what if somebody was going to send you $20 million? And like when he was leading up to that in y'all's talk, the whole time I was sitting there thinking, I'm like, God dang, nobody's approached me with like a couple $1 million to invest. It's like, I like to think I've got a pretty broad reach, and nobody said anything to me about, wanting to invest in this opportunity.
Hey, Michael, what would you do if I gave you $20 million right now?
Take a deep breath.
Yeah, I wasn't ready for that question either.
Yeah, no, I mean, legitimately, like, and I didn't expect you to be like that, but I think that ultimately what is happening in our culture is like, we are all being suppressed. So y'all talked a lot about, capitalism and the economic systems that we're under and all of that. Like, I kind of consider myself to be like a utilitarian capitalist. I don't know if that's a real thing or if I just made it up, but like, utilitarianism, as I understand it, is what does the most good for the most amount of people over the longest period of time. Ergo, I am a capitalist. I believe capitalism works. I don't think we've lived under capitalism for, minimally 40 years, minimally. And now we're reaping what we sowed in allowing the cronyism to fester. But now we see that, like in regenerative ag, we beat the war drum on we're going to save the world, and we try to tie it back into carbon credits. But what we're actually doing by doing that is we're chasing those big industry players, those big industry dollars, and we're leaving behind the consumers. And a lot of times we ignore the consumers. And that's why, like, I don't know. I don't have the answers here. I'm literally just posing more or less questions. Is like, I don't know what we do to bridge that gap as the large scale, the consumer base loses buying power and our prices have to go up so that we can remain in business. Like that squeeze, without radical mindset change in the consumer base to understand the tricks that have been played on them in the past, B, the potential health benefits, but C, the economic implications of, maybe paying a little bit more, but that money stays in your community or stays in your region and gets reinvested there. I think the decentralization of the food system, but also the decentralization of the consumer marketplace is going to be what has to happen for this to really eventually for David to slay Goliath. if you want to frame it that way.
Okay. So I appreciate your thoughts.
Yeah.
And consumers' buying patterns are changing. We've
Yes.
seen that over the last 3 years. And that's a pattern that's going to continue.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, though, as the position you and I are in, where we're basically trying to sell grass.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And we're selling into a marketplace where it's very difficult to differentiate our product from a commodity product.
Mm-hmm.
So the way we have to do that is selling our story.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, now here's the rub. Okay. You and I are trying to sell grass direct to consumer and not be a part of this, existing commodity system that's basically it's a shell game to redistribute federal tax dollars and federal subsidies to big multinational corporations. It's not handouts to farmers. Like the farm bill they're talking about, I think the farm bill they're talking about is over $1 trillion, and it's like over 82% of it is SNAP benefits.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's calling it a farm bill is wrong. Like it's
when they started allowing SNAP benefits to be spent on sugary drinks, on ultra processed food, like, in my opinion, SNAP benefits should be for a bag of wheat, a jug of milk, a tub of lard, cheese, butter, like
bare
ingredients, like fucking ingredients.
Like
that's
cook.
what SNAP
like you gotta
benefits
cook that stuff.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, if you want free food, you got to put in a little bit of work to turn it into something that, into a meal. Like you shouldn't be able to go buy Stouffer's lasagna and Mountain Dew, and Doritos and Kit Kats on your damn SNAP card. Like, that's my opinion. If you want to come after me, redhillsrancher@gmail.com. I've got thick skin. Bring it on.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have to compete in a marketplace on price against commodity product that's subsidized. Now, your ranch isn't big enough for me to try to get you a carbon contract, so I'm not going to waste my breath.
Yes.
There'll be a day for you. Okay. Your day's coming. Carbon, I mean, like, we could probably have a 3-hour debate and not get anywhere about whether or not carbon credits actually do a damn thing. Here's the point. People want to throw money at guys like you and me for managing land the right way.
Okay. I think it's worthwhile in that. I mean, I don't throw the ecological implications or the marketed ecological implications out the window. The real world implications are definitely worth it for sure. I don't think it's necessarily all like a ruse or anything like that. It's just that I think, like you and Hobbs both talk about, like, well, beef is like, Hobbs likes to call it a waste product. I call it a byproduct. He calls it a waste product to keep his mindset right.
I think I used one word. He used the other. Then like we got an art. Then like somebody posted on LinkedIn, and he was like, "No, I said that." And I'm like, "Wait a minute." I went back and read the transcript. I'm like, "Okay, I see what's going on here." Anyway,
but
byproduct, waste product, same thing.
Yeah, and it's just about what carrot you're chasing, and for those who have the ability to chase the carbon credits, like such as yourself, like, I don't see that as wrong, and I'm not throwing shade at you, whatever. I'm just saying, like, for people like me who that's not an option, that's not a viable option right now, that's not a means by which I can get funds, I can't ignore the customer base. So in other words, I can't go out and just buy a pile of Core Annie cattle that I can just because they're so small, I can get so many of them, and up my stocking rate so high, and just cross them with Mashonas so I can just increase their efficiency even more, and basically effectively do what Hobbs is doing, because that's the carrot he's chasing, and what he's doing fits that end. However, I know that, like, on my side of the spectrum, I still have to chase a consumer, largely of which is uneducated but willing. Like, the majority of my customers are not people that well, I've been buying whole beef my whole life. And like, I just decided I really wanted to try, to switch to grass fed. Like, no, the majority of my customer base is I've never bought beef this way before. And I've never bought this kind of beef before. And, you have to hold their hand and walk them through it. And, I've had multiple people, when I started, had really small frame cows. I still have pretty small frame cows. And they get steaks and they're like, hey, these are really small. And I'm like, yeah, because they're real and they fit our environment and they work. So like, I think it's a baby bathwater situation where like you can't just say like, oh, we're here to save the planet and that's all that matters. And if we get some beef out of that game in the process, cool, we'll give it away, because it ignores the people. And I realize this is kind of a political conversation. It's like it ignores the people that still have to make a living on that product. They have to sell their grass through that medium. Much in the same way that it's the same sense as, and I've said this to you before, my biggest competitor is the guy down the road who owns, a contracting business, but has 20 cows that are a hobby and sells beef to all his friends and family and anybody else that calls him up. And he sells it for $3 a pound. It's like, that's not paying his bills and he doesn't need it to. It's a fun hobby for him. And he is under the illusion he's making money.
There's also something to be said about livestock can also be a huge tax shelter.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to name any names. No. Let's just say I have a friend that has, for example, a construction company,
mm-hmm.
and some grass and some cows. And if the choice is paying taxes on $120,000 of business profit, or moving that over and spending that on his cow herd.
Yep.
By buying a new feed truck or buying, a really high dollar bull or buying that nice shiny chute every year.
Yeah.
That I think there's a lot of there's some whales like that
mm-hmm.
that don't care, that they're just using their cows and their ranch as a tax write-off.
I would make the argument. Well, it's not really an argument. It's a continuation of your point that has become probably by and large the norm in this country when you're talking about large scale operations, because I know like a couple of guys that I met when I went to Ranching for Profit in Montana. It's like they were ranch managers of big places out there that were owned by absentee landowners from California with big money, and their goal is not to make money. Their goal is to lose money, because the owners are making massive amounts of money somewhere else doing something else, and they're using it ergo as a tax shelter. And so that to me, that's a different bridge to cross, different problem for a different day.
And that's fine until they buy the ranch next to you and double your property tax basis.
Bingo. And that's basically what's happened here. Is we've had lots of very wealthy people, and I'm talking about wealth that starts with B's instead of M's. Come in. We had the now CEO of UPS bought a spread south of us. We had a billionaire from Texas come. I don't know how they made their money, buy a ranch less than a mile from us that was friends with the CEO of UPS. It's like once the word gets out, it's like, hey, we found this great little undiscovered spot here. When the money starts to move in, especially when you live in a mismanaged rural community, which I would venture to say most rural communities probably are pretty badly mismanaged.
Show me a community that's not mismanaged, please.
Yeah. And money starts to move in there, then they start seeing dollar signs that they haven't seen before. And so all of a sudden it's like they turn into full-fledged thieves, thinking that they're going to get their piece off of these new rich folks moving in. And in reality, all they do is just encourage all the people that are actually productive, people that have been living there for generations, or even somebody like me who's first generation, who are actually trying to make a living on the land. You're just incentivizing us to sell our land to that rich person because they don't give a rip about, the taxes tripled. Oh, okay, add another zero to that check, send it in. I'll write that off. It's like, and whereas like people like us, it's like, okay, when your taxes go from, $15,000 a year to 45, all of a sudden, I talked earlier about like that amount of money that I pay myself for my labor, that money's got to come from somewhere. And that's the only pot left that's not spoken for.
It's not like you can jack up your prices 15% on your
product. Yeah, exactly. A product that's already being sold at a premium. It's not like I'm out here. I always use the term like I'm not selling Kias, I'm selling Porsches. So it doesn't have mass market appeal because most people are going to scoff at the price, and that's okay. That's but they also don't realize the conditioning that's gone on both at the retail level and the wholesale level to get at the retail level, the beef they're buying in the grocery store is between 40 and 50% water, and so. Shocking. Ours isn't like that. And then B, at the wholesale level, like I said before, they don't know anything about that beef they're buying. They don't know where it came from. And by and large, it's cheap imported beef that's run through a grinder to subsidize their desire for cheap food. And so like that's not the customer I'm chasing. And like I'm fine with that. It's just the lack of awareness is, I feel like, leading us down a path of, I won't say crisis, but I don't, I can be hopeful on one end, and on the other end, it's like I feel like we're stretched between always feeling like tomorrow could be the day that like it lights off and we're just like all of a sudden we got more orders and we know what to do with, and everything just takes off and before you know it, like flip a switch in 3 years we're white oak pastures. But on the flip side of that, you feel like you're walking the tightrope of like, hey, like next week, when the bills come due, we might have to load up some cattle and haul them off and liquidate them just so we can make it.
I know how that feels, Michael.
Yeah,
I've been there in the last 12 months, buddy.
Yeah. I mean, it's rough, and so it's rough also psychologically in the context of the niche we live in, me and you, where you see this influx of big capital. Whether it's carbon credits, whether it's whether it is people that have mega funds going out and wanting to be play John Wayne on the weekends, and they just want somebody to manage their place, but they want it managed holistically. They want to be a regenerative operation because they saw a YouTube video of Alan Savory a couple years ago talking about this one thing about desertification, and they think like that's what they really want. And so like there's opportunities that exist out there, but for people that are trying to make their own way in a decentralized form, like going at that, and especially going at it alone, is daunting and really scary. So
okay, so the big money guys that want to come buy a ranch so they can play cowboy on the weekend, so they can play Yellowstone on the weekend.
Yeah.
Great. You want it managed holistically because you watched an Alan Savory video a couple years ago. I think it's probably 10 million views by now.
Yeah.
Great. You don't care if it makes money. Great. Where are you going to find a manager? Because that takes a guy like you, me, Hobbs. Where are you going to find those guys? Like, you're going to have to make me a pretty good offer to get me off this ranch and get me to go somewhere else and start a new project.
My point exactly is to get the expertise level that they want, they like, if that's truly an opportunity that exists, and I'm not saying that those are everywhere, I'm just saying I know that bound to exist either now or in the future. And I live in the same headspace as you. It's like, okay, I've spent over a decade of my life, learning what I now know, and I've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in mistakes that I've made, that I can avoid.
That's called education.
Yes. And it's like, so again, if that's something somebody wanted, it's the exact same principle I use when pricing our beef, is because that's the same thing. It's like, you're buying my expertise. You're not buying, if you want Joe Schmo that knows how to saddle a horse and make sure a barbed wire fence isn't broken, cool. You can find those for a dime a dozen, and he'll probably take the job for, $45,000 a year plus a house. Like, cool, have at it. But if you want somebody
$250 a day.
Yeah, exactly. Or, but if you want somebody that carries the breadth of knowledge to truly transform ecosystems, that's not cheap. And
it's a short list too.
It's a very short list. Well, and mainly due to the fact that even though we are very forward-thinking people, we're still of the the ranching culture, in the fact that we are exceptionally stubborn people.
I don't know who you're talking about.
Like, it's kind of goes back to that whole, like, I've staked my claim, and, come hell or high water, like, I'll die here before you pull me off of this place. And I told my wife this the other day, because we live I don't really talk about my personal life at all, especially not on social media, but we're pretty hippie, in the way, that's what I call it. That's my colloquialism for the way we live. Crunchy is like the modern terminology for that.
What does that mean anyway?
So it's basic for my best understanding. Because I'm just a rancher, right? Like, for my best understanding, it's basically people that, like organic food, pretty anti-pharmaceuticals, pretty holistic, like to get your feet in the dirt. So, what in 1970 would have definitely been considered a dirty hippie.
Okay.
Minus
now they just call them crunchy.
Yeah, minus the free love. It's a little more family values oriented. It's kind of a modern or postmodern.
So it's the 70s without LSD.
Yeah, pretty much. And chickens.
Okay.
It's like the modern homesteader-ish movement is fairly it's homeschool oriented, bucking the system. Yeah, it's for lack of better terms, it's people that are fairly well aligned with our values for the most part.
We don't know it yet.
Correct. The only contradiction being most of them haven't come to the realization that they can't be self-sufficient yet, and that they can't go buy 10 acres. And this is a conversation me and you've had in the past. These are the people that drive the suburbanization of rural America. And they don't realize they're part of that problem. That, like, again, they're living in their paradigm of they're going to fix their own space for their own family. It's very introspective, the mindset. It's not, whereas, like, I feel like we have come to the realization that we're communal beings living in a ecosystem, not simply like your ecosystem doesn't stop at your fence line, right? Like, it may, in the sense of your neighbor may be a crap manager and might be, have grazing cows on dang near bare dirt and weeds. And so there's not a whole lot of biological life left, but that sphere of influence of not only you, but your management decisions still exists. And that you have to, cooperate with your neighbors, with your community, blah, 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 blah. So anyway, I'm really rabbit trailing here. So like going back to crunchy, uh, um, so my wife lives more in the, um, yeah,
Like
she's
how
in,
how crunchy are you guys raw milk crunchy?
yes, I have to go meet my raw milk lady after we finish filming this. So I give her my jars back because she won't even put the milk in plastic.
Okay.
Like, like, so we're
So
raw.
you're that crunchy. You're microplastics and PFAS crunchy.
Yeah, yeah. And like, like we filter the water, because the chemicals in the water are bad.
Because they're putting chemicals in
Yeah,
the water, turn the freaking frogs gay.
yeah.
I mean, he was proven right. Not saying everything he says is right, but
I wouldn't say that either,
but the
he's been
atrazine,
right on some disturbing shit.
yeah, exactly. And so yeah, we're pretty crunchy. So my wife, like for instance, had a conversation with a mom. So my oldest started preschool yesterday, and we were standing out in the parking lot after we dropped him off with one of his friends' moms who just had a baby like 2 weeks ago. Mine's born a little before that, but um, she was talking about formula, and my wife, who's very knowledgeable in that arena, was talking about like, hey, she was asking her like, what kind of formula would you use? And my wife's like, well, I wouldn't use any brands that came out of the United States. I'd only buy European brands, because there's so many chemicals that are put into the food system in the U.S. that are outlawed in Europe, that and blah 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 blah. And so my wife and me kind of struck up a conversation after that about like she was talking about, why does it just seem like everything I see about Europe is they're more family centric. Like every restaurant has a playground, or like they like for moms. She's living in that headspace of being a new mom, with three little kids and trying to, manage life here, where we don't live in a culture that really celebrates that or makes it easy. And so again, I told you, like, we're going to rehash a lot of shit you and Hobbs talked about. Because Hobbs talked about Europe and whatnot, and that's just been something that's been on our mind lately. And she was like, would you consider moving to Europe? And I was like, again, somebody have to make me a real good offer to do that. And I just think that the one thing, and Hobbs mentioned this in y'all's interview, and it's just true, is going back to what I said about we are still a people that understands freedom. I feel like while the ranching community is the hardest working bunch of people that you'll ever meet, I think that's the one place where we, the new generation, is learning that we can be the most well-lived people, not simply be hearkened as like known for being like dawn to dusk, toil the soil people, but we could like through the regenerative aspects of what we do, we can actually regenerate our own physical well and mental, spiritual well-being, by making time that other people don't have the luxury of making.
It's interesting you brought that up because we've had some of the same conversations in the last couple of years. Like, we don't like the path the country is on. Don't like the trajectory that our legislature and executive have this country on. Like, there's a lot of things not good. But where in the hell else are you going to go with this much freedom? Yep. I mean, there's nowhere else you can go in the world and enjoy the freedoms we have here. I mean, disregard the Second Amendment. Like, let's just talk about the first and having the freedom of speech. There is nowhere else in the world where your speech is as protected as it is in the United States. Canada, try going to Canada and calling somebody by the wrong name. They throw your ass in jail.
Yep.
I mean, you want to go there? Okay, fine. You want to go to Europe with no real private property rights?
Yeah.
And
Well, I mean, that was
8% tax burdens.
that was
Okay.
a continuation of the conversation we had. As I told my wife, I was like, I think if I was going to leave the U.S., and this is all, of course, hypothetical because I'm not going to, but I think like South America would probably be the only place that I would even consider going, just simply because I feel that they still have a very strong ranching culture. They still societally share a lot of the same moral values, but politically, it's a cluster, right? It's not. There is no greener grass than where we currently stand, in my opinion. The
grass is always greener on the other side of the fence, but it still needs to be mowed.
Yep.
It still needs herd effect.
That's even better.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is like we have the ability here to decentralize our own existence, or I should say federal, like it's kind of federalism. Like we're kind of taking back federalism, I feel like, culturally, and both from the left and the right. Okay, so it's like it's not. That's what's driven this like national divorce narrative that you hear. That's not driven simply by a bunch of like pro-Trump Republicans who just don't want to, deal with people with blue hair. It's just as much the left wanting to disassociate from the rest of the country as it is the right, like being like, yeah, I'm kind of sick of this. And I think that as that narrative is driven forward, it leads us more towards decentralization, which ultimately is a good thing. I don't think national divorce, like politically speaking, is a good thing, but I think that decentralization down to the non-political factors is obviously a good thing. I think that we have an opportunity, whether it's through cryptocurrency, which I fully admit I know almost nothing about, through Web3, through AI, through all of these, like these very fresh, new, almost dangerous technologies, to really reshape what it means to be a free citizen of this country. And I'm not really sure what it looks like in the future. Like I go back and forth on that, like whether it's going to get better or whether it's going to, you could ask me tomorrow and I might be like doom and gloom. Right now, I'm trying to see the positive.
I feel like that a lot of days. Like you could ask me tomorrow and I might have an answer 180 degrees out just because I heard something on the news that upset me.
Yeah, but I think that is normal. I think that we obviously adapt to new information that we're given, and we operate within the context that we know. But I think the current political system as we know it much mirrors the land ownership in this country, in the fact that it's very old. Okay. And the old political regimes will die off, much like the old landowners will eventually die off. And all of that is going to exchange. It's like I watched a whole YouTube video the other day from this political analyst guy that I really like. He does a lot of like alternate history stuff, but he does a lot of political review as well. And he's talking about like we basically will look back on this period of history as the 30 years war, like we look at the 30 years war, because like GWAT was based, and global war on terror for those of you who don't know, was basically 20 plus years, and you could argue that it's still happening, and so like that
you wouldn't have to argue with me. I know it's
yeah. Maybe not as in full force as we once were, but like we're in a period of deep turmoil and conflict, but we aren't on the scale of a, world war. Obviously that could change tomorrow. And if it did, that would upend a lot of this entire conversation.
I was going to say, like, I haven't really been paying attention to what's been going on in Ukraine, but I think the Ukrainians are doing a pretty successful counteroffensive, trying to throw the Russians out of the Donbass and the eastern parts of the country.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
but I listen. Do you listen to Peter Zeihan at all?
Yeah, I do. I haven't caught any of stuff in the last couple of days, but I do try to stay current and attention what he's saying.
I try to keep up with him a good bit. He's pretty well informed. And he said something about that the other day that it was the how that last year they came to an agreement that Ukraine was still going to be able to export all of their wheat,
right,
and whatnot, and that just got revoked. Like they
not just revoked. The Russians blew up the grain terminals.
Yeah, correct. It's when Russia breaks a contract, they don't do it lightly. It's not like Putin just called up Zelensky and it's like, hey, by the way, yeah, we're not going to let you do that. So it's a full bird finger. So what's that going to do to commodity wheat prices?
Especially with the drought that we had in the plains and the short wheat harvest. The state of Kansas, known as the wheat state,
yes,
we have to import wheat this year.
Yeah,
from Europe to meet the demands of the flour millers just in the state of Kansas.
That's insane. Because don't y'all have the largest repository of wheat? I'm trying to remember the wheat silos. I've read that statistic a long time ago.
I don't know if we store the most, but we have at least the top 3 largest grain storage facilities in the country are located in Kansas. Number 1 and number 3, number 1, 2 and 3 are in Hutchinson, and number 1 is just southwest of Wichita.
Yeah. And so that being a known fact, and the fact that you still have to import wheat, that's pretty scary, because obviously when you start talking about importing wheat, well, okay, where's it going to come from?
And the thing is, right, the prices from the lack of Ukrainian exports, the short Kansas harvest or the short wheat belt harvest, those prices don't hit consumers until 24 or 25.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
The beef prices,
it will go largely unnoticed by the consumer until it's too late.
Because of the lag in the commodity system, and there's so much volume that's got to work through that system, and the way the contracting and deliveries work.
Yep.
Consumers are not going to feel price shocks on goods derived from wheat until probably sometime into summer 24 or into 25. It's just the way it works. And by that time, nobody, when bread goes to $6 a loaf, nobody's going to remember that the Russians blew up the Ukrainian grain silos in the summer of 2023, and that 2 years of prolonged drought caused short wheat harvest in the wheat belt. Nobody's going to remember that.
Mm-mm.
All they're going to do is scream the price of food, the price of food, the price of food. And we need more SNAP benefits. We need more subsidy. Got to have cheap food.
And so the answer to that is, again, picking up where you and Hobbs left off, it is the messaging through platforms such as ours, trying to reach consumers in a real way to inform them. I'm not looking to become a news outlet, right? I'm not trying to start an ag news TikTok, but I try to keep people abreast of, if something major happens. The bigger issue to me is changing people's purchasing habits such that becomes irrelevant. And because food security, it kind of has 2 spectrums. You have the poor, which is typically when you talk about food insecurity, that's when you're talking about poor people, or especially urban neighborhoods where there's food deserts, all that kind of stuff. On the flip side of that, you have like just food security in general, which is no matter what your socioeconomic status is, it's knowing that whether you go to the store or whether you call up somebody, that there will be food available to you. And so that's another thing that I kind of factor in. And I might be wrong for doing this, but when I price my product, I like to think, like, I always tell my customers, like, I'm not in this business to sell beef. I'm in this business to make relationships. And I like to think that, I'm effectively making, if I don't overextend myself, then I'm making relationships such that if, God forbid, there is some sort of food crisis, that those people who have bought from me before, all they have to do is pick up the phone. And they know their rancher. I got you. Like, you bought from me last year, I'll have you beef this year. And to quell that. And people, it's almost like you're selling insurance, for lack of better terms, because most people don't value insurance. In fact, I mean, I don't. I think a lot of it's a racket. But most people don't value insurance until they need it, until that thing has gone awry. But again, I cannot service people in the region. Like I could. I guess I shouldn't say that. I could make a way to do it, but I'm not trying to recreate Omaha steaks, right? Like, I don't want, if you're in California, I love you. Thanks for supporting me. I don't want to be your rancher, because I
know a guy in
be your
Southern
rancher.
California that would love to sell you awesome pasture finished beef.
Yeah.
Like, let's connect them with that person, and
Correct. And so
let
that
Kevin at Perennial Pasture sell them beef from right there in Southern California. Let's reduce our food miles. Let's have some more cooperation rather than competition.
Well, and I wanted to talk to you about this some. It's like, and you already are abreast of this, but like, we have started, and I say we, me, and I think there's 7 of us, off the top of my head, have started a cooperative, a grass-fed cooperative, because for a multitude of reasons. One being that some of us have pretty decent social media followings and have the ability to market beef in places that we can't get to easily, cheaply, effectively. So it was bridging that gap, getting a nationwide serviceable network of people, so you could at least hook somebody up regionally with a rancher. And 2 is because there's all these other sub-services out there, like Butcher Box, Good Ranchers, Moink, to name a few. I'm sure there's others. They're all
Farm Share. Yeah.
They're all middlemen, right? Like, they're all, like, they are a bottleneck through which to access customers. So, like, in other words, it's just the same corporate model rinsed and repeated, where you're a link in the supply chain and all the profits flow uphill. And whereas the grass-fed cooperative, we're kind of the inverse of that, in that the cooperative is merely a marketing catalyst to connect consumer to rancher. It's not to harbor all the profits and to suck profits out of them. And so I guess, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, but go ahead.
So that's a great point about extractive. And, we don't I don't want to pick on any company. Last week's episode was with Henry from Farm Share. I think it's a cool platform. Not sure if I'm going to sign up or not, but I think it's a cool platform. I'm sure it's useful for people, and it's I'm sure it's useful, and so are the others.
Yeah.
Not to take anything away from what you're doing. Okay. Profit. That's where we were. That's kind of how the beef industry, the cattle industry ended up the way we ended up. I mean, 1973 was a high for cattle prices. Okay. And then by the late 70s, it was crashed because everybody wanted to get in when it was good. And the people that got in while it was good they rode the crash. The people that were in when it was good, they rode it all the way up and were like, hey, okay, this is pretty cool. And some of them survived the crash, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that crash gave us the check off.
Yeah.
That crash gave us NCBA and gave us the check off.
Uh-huh.
And since then, things haven't ever been as good. So people taking profit out, that was the beef producers. That was the cattle producers back in the late 70s, early 80s saying, we suck at marketing. We give up.
Yeah.
Somebody do it for us. It's worth $1 a head. That's fine. And now here we are 40 years later, stuck with it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm okay with the middleman taking a percentage.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm okay with them taking some out of the revenue stream because they're doing me a valuable service. And to be fair, I haven't done diligence on all of these platforms. Oh, yeah. So some of this I'm talking out of my ass. But, those platforms should exist for the purpose of taking the least amount of money out of that chain as possible and passing maximum benefit back to the producer. And the purpose of the platform is to connect producers to consumers. And
okay, are you ready to climb out of your ivory tower now, Brian? And face the music of the fact that all of those companies, and I'm not saying they'll all end up there, but they're all hard
to make money.
What they are, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm in business to make money. So are you. Like, that's what business is all about. Yep. Profit is not the evil in this conversation. It's the centralization of power that is the problem. And I'm sorry, but when I know nothing about the corporate structure of Butcher Box, I know nothing about the corporate structure of Good Ranchers or any of these other whatever. But I know darn good and well that they're all set up to eventually have either some VC person or, Kraft Foods come and stroke them a $2 billion check. And now they just basically gut the system that they had built, ignore the customer base. It's the same thing that's happened with every IP, from Star Wars to Lord of the Rings to any, whatever in the media space, where you have this intellectual property that has a massive following, ergo it's worth a ton of money because people love it for specific reasons. But now we're going to let the corporate interests buy it. They're going to completely ignore those people that made it worth money to begin with, so that they can do their own creative thing with it in hopes that it'll make billions of dollars for them. And the same thing, rinse and repeat over and over, has happened in corporate America for many, many decades. And these businesses are set up such that you cannot tell me that anybody with a fiduciary responsibility to their investors would, and let's say their balance sheet is, they're making, let's call it $10 million a year in profits. And the CEO of Kraft Foods calls up the CEO of, I'm going to pick on Butcher Box, and says, hey, we want to buy you out for, $1.2 billion. It's a 10x return on a 10-year time horizon on your profits. If you have a fiduciary responsibility to your investors, you can't turn that deal down. And that's the way that this has worked time immemorial. And that's the direction it's going to go. So
you know where that's rooted?
I would like for you
to enlighten me. A lawsuit where the Dodge brothers sued Henry Ford 110 years ago, because Henry Ford wanted to take corporate profits and give them back to the workers and improve workers' quality of life. And the Dodge brothers, owning about 7-8% of Ford, said, no, your duty as a company is to return value to the shareholders, to profit to the shareholders. And that went to the Supreme Court. And that is the law of the land.
Yep. It is.
I mean,
and
when we say we're in business to make money, it's based on Ford v. Dodge.
Yep. Wow.
And that's just 110 years of culture.
Yeah. And it's become so intertwined with who we are as a society that it's weird to think that now the quote unquote old labor left has probably more in common with Trump, Trump followers than they do with actual leftists. But not to digress back into politics too much, like staying on the corporate bandwagon, is the grass-fed cooperative. We tried to build a system, or trying to build a system, that is functionally immune to that corporate buyout structure. And so we insulate ourselves from that by being a conduit and attaching a consumer directly to a rancher, and not just like hey, this PR campaign kind of like meet this month's rancher that works with us. Like, no, like, how about you actually buy straight from that guy? Because now you know me. Like, yeah, you might have found me via some marketing that the grass-fed cooperative did, but it may have been Lance Pecos, the cowboy ninja that went on American Ninja Warrior and wore a grass-fed cooperative t-shirt or whatever. And you're like, hey, that's pretty cool. And then you looked, I've followed that guy for years. And you're like, oh, well, I live in Georgia. Oh, I could buy a dude from this guy. And now you know me. You don't have to go back through this middleman. You now know your rancher. And so that's kind of the model we wanted to use. And so anyway, that plus the decentralization aspect of it, of like, we know that we have a broken food system, or a pinprick in the balloon is all it takes to completely deflate the balloon that we're currently standing on in terms of food security. And we want to do our part to help fix that. And, with the people that want to support what we're doing ecologically, economically, and, want the health benefits, want the, whatever. But I think more than anything, it's the reconnection. And so that's why I say, like, I tell people I'm in the relationships business. I'm not necessarily in the beef businesses, because I see it time and again, people that are my customer that come to the ranch and they say, oh man, I would love to do this. And
Yeah.
because
Yeah, you
they
say that.
yeah, because they really, what, so you know this about me, like, I have a degree in communications, so it's like I can see behind the veil of what they're actually saying. What they're saying is rooted in marketing. They've been marketed through media, through westerns, through
Yellowstone.
Yellowstone, through all these things, to have a romanticized, bucolic vision of what it means to work the land. But two is, and this, like, we live in a very psychologically broken civilization, in that, like, man was not made to sit inside of a box under fluorescent lights, whether staring at a screen and typing on a computer, or attaching widget A to widget B for 8, 10, 12 hours a day. And so I think a lot of people have a run in the park mentality to agriculture. They think it's like, well, I like to camp on the weekends, and so, like, I would love to work outside, and I would love to mess around with, I like wildlife, so I would love to work with livestock. And you're like,
Like, oh yeah, I like to camp. I can go live off grid in Alaska.
yeah.
It's not the same thing.
It's not the same thing. And my answer is always, I'm living the dream, but a lot of days it looks like a nightmare. And people don't really grasp that, but they're well intentioned in what they mean. And what they mean is rooted in that loss of connection, because especially in the Southeast, everybody here is pretty much 2 to 3 generations removed from the farm. Everybody's family had a farm, whether it was,
My grandpa had a few cows.
Yep. Whether it was they grew up poor and they had, 10, 20, 40 acres and a couple of cows and some pigs, and, and grandma, cut chickens' heads off and pluck chickens and strung beans on the back porch, or whether they grew up, more astute and their family comes from, owned a plantation or a big sprawling, estate or whatever. But everybody, for the most part, had a connect because, and this goes back to pre-civil, pre-antebellum period. It's like the South is a very rural society, and we are pretty much predicated on, attachment to the land. And that goes even further back into like the Scots-Irish deeply moved into Appalachia and the South, and they brought with them that inherent connection to place. And whereas like the Slavic Germanic people that moved into, say, like the Midwest, very orderly people that were rooted in place but had focused more on function. And so like as it plays out for us culturally here, there's a big I think void in a lot of people's life that like they want to reestablish a connection to the land. And so that, I think, is the root of what most people mean when they say that. And so I try to offer people a way to commune with that. And that almost sounds like a Salatin-esque word to me, and because unlike Joel, who I think has done probably the most good for the movement in terms of spreading the message, I think he's probably the best messenger that we've had.
Yes.
I think that, he's done some great things, but he's also made his farm available to anybody 24/7. You come out here, check it out, whatever. I'm personally not doing that. I don't want to be on call 24/7 to have, feel like, oh, who's driving up the driveway? But I still want to, for people that want to make that connection, I want to make it available to them. If they're paying customers of mine, clearly but that may be a small tidbit. I've had multiple customers, much like the guy I mentioned earlier, who's buying the kids camp. I've had multiple customers who have gone on to, they started at buying my beef. They've gone on to buy some property. And they're calling me like, hey, I want to get some chickens, like, can you tell me what to do? Like this. And so, like,
I'd be happy to tell you what to do. My consulting rate starts at $1,000 a day.
Well, I mean, again, that is something that I struggled with a lot. And I think I talked to you about this last time we did a podcast. Like, I do a very little, but I do some consulting for people, mainly because like land is my passion. And I enjoy looking at new land, thinking about how I would utilize it, what's the right, and I enjoy helping people avoid the mistakes that I've made. But at the same time, like, I've always been in this wrestling match between like, okay, like, you got this person who's bought, 5 acres and thinks they're going to raise all their own food or whatever. It's like, okay, or did they realize the paradigm they're living inside of?
Not saying it isn't possible.
Yeah.
But
it looks a lot different than you might think it does.
Yeah.
It
might seem real simple reading a Joel Salatin book, but reality will smack you in the face.
Yes. And that's what I have found, and this goes back to that crunchy line of thinking in people, because that tends to be the majority of people that get into this, get in and over their head way too quickly, and then want to like, I didn't think it would be this way, and then they need help. But my whole thing is trying to, originally I tried to help those kind of people, and then I was like, well, I went through this struggle of like, well, I'm not really helping the agricultural community by helping homesteaders. Like they're not doing it for a living. They're not really benefiting the agricultural community. They're just looking out for themselves. And that's not bad. That's just not really doing a whole lot of external good. But then I kind of came to the realization, it's like, okay, but if I can help those people and wake them up to, like, hey, you're not in this alone, and you can't do all this by yourself, and you need to plug into the whole.
You need to
That's
plug
kind of
into
like,
your local food community and
yeah,
cooperate with your neighbors
yep,
and not fight them.
exactly. And that, like, that's the part that I think it will over time do the most good. It's kind of, I've heard that said before, like the education sphere is like, a teacher oftentimes doesn't see the good, that the impact they make on the world. It's normally recognized, long after they've done their duty.
Okay, that's fair. When you started college, how many of your high school teachers did you appreciate versus how many of them do you appreciate now?
Okay, I'm probably not the best person to ask that question too, but I would say, yeah, it is more. It has grown. That number has grown.
And and the point that I would make is, sometimes when we're right near one of those events, we don't understand the significance
yeah,
of the event. We don't understand the influence that that person has on us, because maybe it's not, maybe it's not something overt that they did. Maybe it's something really subtle that they said that's living in the back of your head for 10 years. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, that's what they meant. And it changes your whole paradigm.
Yeah.
Not saying anything like that's happened, but the older I get, the times that I do sit back and reflect on the mentors and the teachers that I've had, not just school teachers.
Yeah.
The ones that I didn't necessarily appreciate at the time, those are the ones I try to go back and think about. Like, what did he teach me that I know now? Like, oh, well, like my high school English teacher was extremely strict with how you wrote papers. Like, if you did one run-on sentence in a 10,000 word paper, you got an F automatically. And if that was the only thing that was wrong, you still got an F, because he hated run-on sentences, and you better not have one in his paper.
Wow. Made you really good at punctuation.
My punctuation, my grammar, I think is pretty good for not ever going to college. And I thank Mr. Bruce Hurdle for that. I mean, he was very strict. He had extremely high standards for writing. He had extremely high standards for annotations and footnotes, and you had to be on your game. And you couldn't bullshit him, because everybody that tried to
look him up.
Everybody that tried to bullshit him got caught.
Yeah.
So I guess it's just, perspective and being able to look back and reflect and, see some of those influences back in your life and realize, like, yeah, that person really did change me for the better, even though I might have hated them at the time. And I think that we've all had some experiences like that. So you started to talk a little bit earlier about this lady that you met, and then, her wife her and your wife were kind of going back and forth about formula.
Oh yeah.
So while I was down in Stillwater, and I'll just say it. So the essentials of regenerative ranching, it's kind of like a 101.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would assume that.
I felt like a PhD auditing a freshman course.
Yeah.
Like that's honestly what I felt like. So there's some parts where I kind of tuned out. Well, I started going down this thought experiment about two identical twins that were carried by the same mother. On the day of their birth, the birth mother gives up one of the twins for adoption. Okay. Just thought experiment. So roll with it.
Yeah.
So the baby that stayed with birth mom, his name is Larry. Now, Larry's mom is crunchy.
Okay.
She's crunchy. She's gardening. She's raising him on breast milk. She's raising him, like, she's dragging him around the garden with him while he's a baby, got him on her chest, got her on her back, and, doing the things. There's chickens, there's pigs, there's, sheep, goats, cows, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. So she's the crunchy homesteader mom. Mo's mom is the busy suburban professional mother. single mother. So after her maternity leave, Mo goes straight onto formula, or maybe he went straight on formula the day she brought him home from, probably the day she brought him home from the hospital, because not birth mom, not going to have milk, right?
Yeah.
So Mo's on a steady diet of formula. And I kind of thought about it like, okay, so what's this thought experiment going to be? Like, all right, well, let's write about their 1 year checkup, their 2 year checkup, and their 5 year checkup.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking, okay, so at 1 year old, where's Larry going to be? He's probably going to be toward the bottom of height weight, but he's going to be pretty healthy. And the doctor's going to say, I'm worried about him that he's underweight. You need to feed him more. Mo, the formula baby, was going to be at the top of weight.
Oh.
And doctor's going to say, perfectly healthy. You're doing everything perfect. Great. Keep doing what you're doing. Year 2 is going to be a repeat of the same story. But I would theorize that Larry would be a little bit more cognitively developed because he spends all day with mom.
Yes.
Mo, I would argue, would be less cognitively developed because he's spending all day at daycare around 6 other kids his exact same age with minimal supervision from one adult. And as they get older, let's just say second birthday, they're started on solid food. Larry's eating tomatoes out of the garden. You know, his mom's mushing up meat. She's giving him milk, getting, you know, cheese, all kinds of good stuff. Mo's getting pureed baby food, Cheerios, and formula still. So we go to the year 2 checkup. More of the same. We keep going to the year 5 checkup, which everybody's going to need before we go to kindergarten or preschool or whatever, right? Mo's going to be like borderline obese, maybe pre-diabetic. Larry's still going to be at the bottom of the weight for his height. And the doctor's still going to be concerned that he's eating enough. And let's run this all the way till they're 18 and graduate high school. Mo weighs 260 pounds. He's diabetic. He's got asthma because he can't breathe. Larry weighs 170 pounds. That's 6 foot. Skinny as a rail. Picture of health. Never been sick a day in his life. And Mo's been suffering. Mo's gets sick every month, it seems like. Always has a stuffy nose. Always has a fever. Always has, you know, aches, pains. Something's always wrong with Mo. Like, and I don't know what the purpose of this thought experiment is really. I mean, I was just thinking about it because you brought that up about your wife.
Yeah.
And I think it kind of serves to demonstrate these unintended consequences. We don't know what we don't know. And what we think has been a good thing because we're sold a pack of lies turns out to kill us in the long run. It's like we sell a short-term cure, we sell a short-term comfort, and we never worry about the long-term consequences. And the more we get away from that and go back to a mindset where we're thinking about what action is, if I do this now, what effect is this going to have in 10 years? What effect is this if I do this to the land? What effect is it going to have 7 generations down the line? Which is some of the philosophy that some Native Americans had.
Yes.
Okay. How does what I do today affect this land for 7 generations? Not worried about, you know, if that guy in the next tent over there is going to be pissed off. We're not worried about that. We're worried about what it's going to look like in 7 generations.
Yep.
And it's that kind of long-term thinking that we need to get back to. Like, how are we going to want the next generation of children to grow up and be fed? How are we going to want them to eat? And I think that's why there's so many crunchy moms now, because they've seen what's happened over the last 2 generations to our society, and they don't want any part of it, or they want to do something different. And it might not even be a conscious thing. It might just be a subconscious drive to want to get away from that. And maybe some of them don't even understand why.
And I think your thought experiment is also applicable in the ranching community, because when we start talking about how it plays out to raise cattle without the input crutch, like when you raise cattle in their quote unquote natural environment, inherently the ones that thrive in that environment are going to be the ones that are it's a little small, but might not be eating enough, but pass all the health checks.
And like there's
Bring a cap
something
in every year.
here,
You know?
like there's something to the make more with or make do with less, and how it affects us. But and I think most of that is epigenetic. Like we have these like on-off switches, and I'm by no means a geneticist, but I think a lot of times the term genetics gets thrown around all the time in the livestock industry. And in reality, most of what we're looking at is not genetics, it's epigenetics. It's what's been switched on and off. It's not the grand stream of the genetic profile. And so like functionally, I think the child Larry in your thought experiment, it's funny because I've seen this play out with my own children. Is like, yeah, they're a little bit smaller, take a little bit more time to grow. But what's funny is you mentioned like cognitive development, and I've noticed, this is a total sidebar, has nothing to do with livestock really, but I've noticed like cognitively there's, and this may be because we live a pretty isolated life, obviously. The kids that I know of that are eating junk food and are bigger than my kids and go to daycare or, that kind of thing, seems to me like they cognitively develop faster. But I don't necessarily view that as a good thing. So much in the sense, and this is always what I use when I talk to my wife about this, is I use the example of a really good breeder of large or extra large breeds of dogs will typically tell you do not overfeed that animal when it's young. Like they need to be plus 2 years old before you actually feel like you're feeding them what they should eat. Because as they're growing and they're growing so fast, their joints are setting, like you can cause way more problems stacking weight on that animal too early. And I feel like the same thing happens like kind of in the brain, is when you are feeding heavy calorie dense but not nutritionally dense food to your brain, it allows for rapid growth. But it's all sugars based. It's all based on like, okay, and so I think that's why long term, as you said, you see it play out in ADHD, ADD, all that. Like there's a lot of these other things that like I feel like potentially stem from, in the rapid growth phase, we're feeding things that are energy dense, calorically dense, but they're not nutritionally dense. And the kid that gets nutritionally dense food, for a lack of better terms, stacks on or grows quality, grows in terms of higher quality, mental functions. And that only plays out over time. Like I'm obviously not a scientist. I don't know how all that's, you would have to study that for a long time to prove it out. But I think there's enough smoke to say that there's obviously some fire somewhere in that
Good
argument.
luck getting the ethics committee to approve that study.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's a study that needs to be done, to be honest with you. I think it's a study that is already, as we mentioned, is already course correcting. Because I truly believe, because I've seen it firsthand, in the insane, almost barbaric maternal drive. Like when we talk about, we use the term a mother's intuition, right? I don't know if there's not more to that. And I don't want to get to Joe Rogan into this thing and start talking about like, DMT and the other side and all that stuff. But like there is something, whether it is deeply instinctual, or whether it is a true beyond physiological connection between a mother and her child. And I feel like that goes way deeper for children that are breastfed. And again, this is just me living in my own world here. And that like a mother has a desire before her baby's even born to do whatever it takes to protect that baby. That's like a psychological basic thing.
That's hardwired.
Yes, we have done a lot of things in our society to push women to feel like to ignore that thought. However, that's hardwired, and that is instinctual. We see that in the animal kingdom. It's the same thing. It's the same reason a good mama cow will stand there with a pack of coyotes around her and literally stomp her baby to death trying to kill coyotes, until they
if
take
your
her
cows
down
had
too.
horns, they could. If your cows were armed,
Yeah. Well, if they had the tools that God gave them.
However, on that note, I haven't killed a coyote one in 5 years. My cows have. I have not. And I have lost a grand total of 2 calves to coyotes. And like when I tell people that around here, they're like they don't believe me. They think I'm lying. And I think it's just because so I just got through rereading the Lassiter philosophy of raising cattle.
okay,
And Tom Lassiter wrote about like that's kind of his philosophy was more strict than mine. I'll kill armadillos because they're not native to here and they make leg breaking holes out in the pasture. I'll kill skunks too around the house because I don't want them around my spraying my dog or my kids or whatever. But
that's fair.
But by and large, we try to live pretty in balance with our natural environment. And I found early on that killing coyotes was, I think it's hilarious, by the way, that we went from breastfeeding to coyotes. But I found
Welcome to
early on,
Ranching Reboot.
woo! Well, that's what happens when you put me and you together. It just, God knows where it's going to go.
Yep.
But I think that coyotes were one of the things that like people have a stigma about them. And really they're just, for lack of better terms, they're filling a niche that would have been filled by the red wolf, who altogether is not that different in size. Functionally, they're a little bit different in how they hunt and whatnot, but like they're just filling a void. And I feel like as long as we strive to keep our ecosystem in balance, for instance, I've seen more rabbits here this year than I've ever seen before. Probably because we've grown more grass here than we've ever grown before, and they have a lot more places to hide. So the survival rate's been astronomically higher. And I think as your land becomes more in balance with the way that it is meant to be on a productive capacity, the problems we have with predators, and obviously this is very southeastern centric. If I was in the Rockies dealing with, northern Rockies dealing with grizzly bears and mountain lions and stuff, I might have a totally different, or release wolves, I might have a different opinion. But at least here, with the problems we deal with, we just don't have problems with coyotes attacking the cattle because the cattle are a unit. I can put my cattle out in a 20-acre pasture and they still graze as a unit because they've been hardwired now that's how they operate.
Right.
And so you don't have it's much more indicative of the natural systems. And so you don't you might have a couple of cows that stay in the shade, some of the older, weaker cows or whatever. They may just like, I'm not getting out there in the middle of the day. I'll stay here. But they're not really the ones that are in danger, of a single coyote coming up and doing anything to them.
Right.
They're not that stupid. And so we just don't see the issues with coyotes. And I think, there are nights where we'll hear, 4 or 5 of them around, in different directions. But I think far too many people in my area focus so heavily on kill, kill, kill. And instead of what can we do to feed those animals something other than what we're producing? Because we talk a lot about like multi-species grazing, and a lot of times that only gets talked about in the context of
what other livestock classes am I bringing on? But most of us live in an ecosystem that's wrought with other ruminants and other, other fauna. And it's like, why don't we focus on those as well? It's like, okay, if I can up my deer population, if I can sure, do I want my deer fawns to get killed off by coyotes? Of course not. But again,
that natural order of things.
Yeah. But again, would I rather my deer fawns get killed than my calves? Yeah. And guess what? There's going to be some really smart does out there that put their fawns in the right spot, that take care of them. Those are going to make it. And guess what? Genetics get propelled to the next generation. The ones that know how to survive. And guess which coyotes get kicked in the face and stomped on? The dumb ones that are immature and go after a calf on a fresh calf when that angry mama cow ain't having that crap. Like, if all you ever do is just focus, and this is, I think, a Gabe Brown quote, like, if all you ever do is just wake up in the morning and focus on what can I kill today, you're never going to be focused on what you can make live.
Yep.
And so that's kind of the direction that we choose to face our management decisions in. I mean, heck, our tagline is respectfully ranching in nature's image. So it's kind of hard to say you're doing that if you're going out and just blasting every you see.
Going out every day blasting coyotes and spraying brush. Yeah. Well, we got to get out of here.
I was going to say, we've been at this for 2 hours now. You said you got a meeting after this. So
how do you want to end it?
As always. Well, I guess if anybody wants to get in touch with me, reverentwildranch@gmail.com. Find me on TikTok or Instagram at Reverent Wild Ranch. And if you are interested in the Grass-Fed Cooperative and what we're doing, we are Grass-Fed Co-op or grassfedcooperative.com. So yeah, that's my only little spiel, I guess.
You got a coupon code for that Grass-Fed Co-op?
I do. It is WILD10, and that gets you 10% off.
There you go, guys. WILD10 for 10% off on Grass-Fed Co-op.
So
how about that?
It's a little incentivization, but I think we're looking to grow. I say that, I know your audience is heavily rancher based, and we're trying to grow within our means. We're right now, we want to obviously have enough demand. We're trying to build our demand to the point where we can bring on more people. We got an interview with somebody on Tuesday to onboard somebody else. But if you're interested, if you think our standards are actually on the website, if your ranch meets the standards and it's something you think you'd like to possibly participate in, hit us up. We'll can't promise you that it's going to we'll onboard you right away or whatever, but we never hurts to have a backlog. So
good stuff. I might even have to go apply myself.
Hey, please do. No, I don't think I'm overstepping my bounds to say that if somebody's getting onboarded, Brian Alexander might show up to your ranch to make sure you actually mean what you say.
I wasn't going to bring that up, but I would be happy to work with you guys in whatever capacity you would have me in.
Yeah, man. I think that's you and a couple other people that we're both friends with. We've had conversations with. I think for the people that either can be a part of it or maybe not so much in the marketing side of things or the beef sales directly side of things, but have the knowledge base and can validate things. That's pretty important too, because obviously, I know I don't want to keep you any longer, but I'll quickly say, the cooperative had there's plenty of other things out there, other what's the word I'm looking for? Just lost it. Like validating bodies out there, like American Grass Fed Association. There's
certifiers.
Yeah, so like most of those in some form or fashion are pay to play. Not saying they're dishonest, just saying like there's some functional flaws in how people get audited. And we tried to set out to raise the bar in terms of the actual standards being exactly what the consumer perceives the standard to be, not what we as producers know them to be. And that's a much higher bar to jump over. So anyway,
if you're going to call it pasture finished and I show up and you've got pens with feed bunks that look like they've had animals in them recently, and overhead feed bunks, and
you got a feeder on the back of the flatbed, and full of cubes. It's like,
I'm gonna question you. You're gonna get questioned if you say you're grass fed and you're feeding corn silage. Okay, we'll probably let that pass because that's technically correct. But as long as you're upfront about what you're doing, and I'm not like I haven't looked into your detailed standards to know that that's okay or not. Just kind of talking out. I'm just talking.
Yeah. No, that's something that we want to, and that's another part of the cooperative we didn't really touch on, is the auditing process that we've set up. That will, I think, change.
This episode wasn't all about grass-fed co-op. We'll do another one of those later.
Okay, we can do another one of those later. But so anyway, I know you got to get out of here, and I'll just keep running my mouth. So.
Well, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, Michael.
Brother.
Congratulations on your growing family, and I look forward to talking to you and seeing how your no-hay winter went, and seeing how your 45-day breeding cycle went.
Well, you will know long before probably we do another podcast.
Well, let's not wait a year to do another one, bud.
Let's not. Let's do one in a couple of months and check in.
Looking forward to it, man.
All right. See you, brother. Have a good evening.
All right. See you, brother. And rest of you out there in podcast land, I guess go have a good week or something. Bye. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our podcast. We'd also love to hear your thoughts, so leave us a review if you haven't already. And don't forget to check out the Q&A and the polls on Spotify. Your support helps us bring more enlightening conversations and fresh stories from the world of farming and ranching. Thank you for listening to Ranching Reboot, your favorite regenerative ag podcast.